Karoline Leavitt was not your average politician. She had spent years working her way up, earning respect for her honesty and strong values. People admired her because she didn't just talk about change, she lived it. Whether it was helping struggling families in her community or standing up for causes that mattered, Karoline always seemed to put others first. Her faith was a big part of who she was, something she often spoke about openly but never in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was simply a guiding force in her life. One sunny morning, Karoline received an invitation that would soon turn her world upside down. She was asked to appear on The View, one of the most popular talk shows in the country. The producers wanted her to discuss her latest initiatives and share her perspective as a young leader making waves in politics. Excited by the opportunity, Karoline accepted without hesitation. She saw this as a chance to connect with millions of viewers and spread positivity. Little did she know, this appearance would become unforgettable for reasons no one could have predicted. On the day of the show, Karoline arrived early, dressed in a crisp blazer and a warm smile. The set buzzed with energy as crew members rushed around preparing for the live broadcast. As she took her seat at the round table, surrounded by seasoned hosts, she felt both nervous and excited. This was her moment to shine, to let people see the real her beyond headlines and sound bites. The conversation started off smoothly. They talked about her work, her goals, and even shared a few laughs. But then things took an unexpected turn. Midway through the segment, one of the co-hosts brought up the topic of religion. At first, it seemed harmless, a casual discussion about how faith plays into modern society. But as the conversation went on, the tone shifted. The co-host made a comment that caught everyone off guard. What started as a light-hearted joke quickly turned into outright mockery. With a smirk, she cracked a sarcastic remark about God, dismissing the idea of divine guidance as outdated and irrelevant. The room fell silent for a split second before some of the other hosts chuckled awkwardly. Karoline froze. She wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to respond right away, to defend her beliefs and call out the disrespect. But another part of her told her to stay calm. She glanced at the audience, noticing mixed reactions. Some looked shocked, while others seemed amused. Deep inside, Karoline felt a wave of emotions: anger, frustration, and disappointment. This wasn't just about her, it was about all the people who held their faith close to their hearts. How could someone dismiss something so meaningful to millions with such carelessness? As the segment continued, Karoline kept her composure. She didn't lash out or raise her voice. Instead, she listened carefully, letting the words sink in. When the host turned to her for a response, she smiled politely and said, "I think we can agree that everyone deserves respect regardless of their beliefs." Her answer was simple yet powerful. It wasn't confrontational, but it carried weight. The host brushed it off, moving on to the next topic as if nothing had happened. But the damage was done. Backstage after the show, Karoline replayed the moment over and over in her mind. She wondered if she should have said more, stood firmer. Would staying silent make people think she agreed with the mockery? Or worse, would they assume she didn't care? These questions weighed heavily on her. Meanwhile, clips of the episode began circulating online almost instantly. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people defended the co-host, saying it was all in good fun. Others were outraged, calling the comment disrespectful and offensive. Supporters of Karoline flooded her inbox with messages urging her to speak out. They believed she had the platform and the voice to address what had happened. Her team, however, advised caution. They reminded her that any misstep could backfire, especially given the polarized nature of public discourse these days. Karoline knew they had a point, but she also knew she couldn't ignore this completely. Something about the situation gnawed at her. It wasn't just about defending herself. It was about standing up for something bigger than herself. That night, unable to sleep, Karoline sat alone in her hotel room scrolling through social media. She read heartfelt comments from strangers sharing how their faith had helped them through dark times. She saw posts from people expressing hurt and confusion over the mockery they had witnessed. Each story touched her deeply. By the time she finally drifted off to sleep, one thing was clear: She couldn't let this moment pass without doing something meaningful. Whatever she decided to do, it had to come from a place of authenticity, not anger or revenge. Little did Karoline know, this single moment on national television would spark a chain of events that would test her character, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately shape the course of her career. The stage was set and the world was watching. The morning after the show, Karoline woke up to a flood of notifications on her phone. Social media was ablaze with reactions to what had happened on The View. Clips of the episode were everywhere, shared, reshared, and dissected in countless threads. Some people praised her for keeping her cool under pressure, while others criticized her for not speaking up more forcefully. The co-host's comment had struck a nerve, dividing audiences into two camps: those who thought it was harmless humor, and those who saw it as outright disrespect. Karoline scrolled through the posts, her heart heavy. She couldn't help but notice how personal some of the comments were. One person wrote about how their faith had been a lifeline during a battle with cancer. Another shared a story about finding hope in prayer after losing a job. These weren't just opinions. They were real lives, real struggles, and yet, the co-host's words had reduced something so sacred to a punchline. It wasn't just hurtful. It felt dismissive, almost like telling these people their pain didn't matter. As the day went on, the backlash grew louder. Supporters of Karoline demanded that she address the issue publicly. They believed she could bridge the gap between differing viewpoints and bring clarity to the chaos. But there was also pressure from another side. Critics argued that she should let it go, saying dwelling on the matter would only fan the flames. Karoline found herself caught in the middle, unsure of what to do next. Every option seemed risky. If she stayed silent, she risked being seen as weak or indifferent. If she spoke out, she might come across as confrontational or self-righteous. Her team called an emergency meeting to discuss strategy. Sitting around the table, they debated the pros and cons of various approaches. Some suggested releasing a carefully worded statement to clarify her stance without escalating the situation. Others pushed for a full-blown media tour where she could share her perspective in depth. Karoline listened intently, weighing each suggestion. But deep down, she knew none of these solutions felt quite right. This wasn't just a PR problem. It was a human one, and it required a response that came straight from the heart. While Karoline deliberated, the co-host struck back. During the next episode of The View, she addressed the controversy head-on. Smiling confidently, she dismissed the criticism as overreaction, claiming her comment had been misunderstood. "It was just a joke," she said, shrugging off the backlash. "People need to lighten up." Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as if she hadn't realized the impact of her words. To some viewers, this explanation was enough. But for many others, it only made things worse. The co-host's refusal to acknowledge the harm caused infuriated Karoline's supporters even more. Online petitions calling for accountability began circulating, and hashtags like Respect Faith trended on social media. Advertisers started pulling their support from The View, concerned about associating with controversy. The show's ratings dipped slightly, prompting executives to panic behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Karoline remained silent, choosing to observe rather than react impulsively. She knew timing was everything, and rushing into a response could do more harm than good. Days turned into a week, and the tension continued to simmer. Supporters urged Karoline to break her silence, convinced she held the key to resolving the growing divide. Finally, she decided it was time. But instead of firing back with anger or accusations, she chose a different path, one rooted in empathy and understanding. She accepted an invitation to appear on a rival morning show, where she planned to share her thoughts in a way that honored her values, without fueling further division. On the day of the interview, Karoline arrived early, dressed simply but elegantly. As she sat down across from the host, she took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was there. When asked about the incident, she didn't mince words. "What happened on that show hit close to home for me," she began, her voice steady but sincere. "My faith isn't just something I talk about. It's a cornerstone of who I am. It's guided me through some of the toughest moments of my life." She went on to share a deeply personal story about losing someone close to her, a moment when her faith had been the only thing keeping her grounded. Her words painted a vivid picture of vulnerability and resilience, drawing listeners in. She didn't attack the co-host or label her as a villain. Instead, she focused on the bigger picture, the importance of respecting beliefs even when we don't agree with them. "We live in a world where differences often divide us," she said, "but I believe we can find common ground if we approach each other with kindness and respect." Her message resonated far beyond the studio. Viewers tuned in by the millions, captivated by her authenticity. Social media lit up once again, this time with praise for her thoughtful response. People admired her ability to rise above the noise and speak from the heart. Even critics who had initially doubted her intentions softened their stance, acknowledging the grace with which she handled the situation. Behind the scenes, however, the co-host wasn't taking it lightly. Watching Karoline's interview, she felt blindsided. Though Karoline hadn't mentioned her by name, the contrast between their approaches was impossible to ignore. While Karoline had chosen compassion and reflection, the co-host's defense had come across as dismissive and defensive. This realization stung, forcing her to confront the consequences of her actions. For Karoline, the experience was transformative. It reinforced her belief in the power of leading with love and understanding, even in the face of adversity. She realized that moments like this weren't just challenges, they were opportunities to grow, to learn, and to inspire others. As the dust began to settle, she knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced criticism or controversy. But she also knew she had found her voice, and she intended to use it wisely. Little did anyone know, the ripple effects of this single incident were only beginning to unfold. For both Karoline and the co-host, the road ahead would be filled with lessons, choices, and consequences that would shape their lives in unexpected ways. The impact of Karoline's response on the rival morning show was immediate and profound. Viewers who had been divided over the controversy now found themselves leaning toward her side. Her words weren't just persuasive, they were relatable. She spoke about faith not as a rigid doctrine but as a source of comfort, hope, and strength. Whether someone believed in God or not, they could understand the value of respecting what others hold dear. It wasn't about religion, it was about humanity. As clips from her interview spread across social media, people began sharing their own stories. A teacher posted about how prayer helped her stay patient with challenging students. A soldier recounted how his faith kept him going during deployments far from home. Even atheists chimed in, saying they appreciated Karoline's message of mutual respect. For the first time in days, the conversation shifted from anger and division to empathy and understanding. Karoline's calm demeanor and heartfelt storytelling had struck a chord that resonated deeply with millions. But while the public embraced her, the co-host faced mounting pressure. Advertisers continued to pull out of The View, citing concerns about alienating viewers. Ratings dipped further, and whispers of internal turmoil at the network grew louder. Behind closed doors, executives scrambled to contain the fallout. Some suggested bringing the co-host back for another round of damage control, but many doubted it would work. Her earlier dismissal of the backlash had left a sour taste, and attempts to downplay the situation only made things worse. For the co-host, the experience became increasingly isolating. Friends stopped reaching out, fearing they'd say the wrong thing. Colleagues avoided eye contact in the hallway, unsure of how to navigate the tension. At night, she lay awake replaying the events in her mind. Had she really crossed a line? Or was everyone else overreacting? The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Her comment had touched a nerve because it dismissed something profoundly important to so many people. But admitting that felt impossible. It meant swallowing her pride and acknowledging she'd been wrong. Meanwhile, Karoline's star continued to rise. Invitations poured in from all directions. Talk shows wanted her insight. Community organizations asked her to speak at events. Even political analysts began speculating about her future in leadership roles. Yet, despite the growing attention, Karoline stayed grounded. She turned down lucrative offers that didn't align with her values and focused instead on initiatives close to her heart. One project, in particular, stood out: a series of town halls designed to foster dialogue between people of different backgrounds. These gatherings weren't debates. They were safe spaces where individuals could share their experiences and listen to one another. At the first town hall, held in a modest community center, Karoline opened the floor with a simple question. What does respect mean to you? What followed was nothing short of transformative. A young man talked about feeling judged for his tattoos and piercings. An elderly woman shared how assumptions about her age often led to condescension. A single mother explained the stigma she faced raising kids without a partner. Each story highlighted a universal truth. Respect is a two-way street, built on listening and understanding rather than labeling or dismissing. Karoline listened intently, nodding along as participants spoke. When it was her turn to address the group, she emphasized the importance of humility. We're all human, she said. We make mistakes, but the measure of our character isn't whether we stumble, it's how we respond when we do. Her words earned applause, but more importantly, they sparked meaningful conversations. Attendees exchanged contact information, promising to stay connected and continue the dialogue. By the end of the evening, strangers had become allies, united by a shared desire to bridge divides. Back in the spotlight, however, tensions simmered. The co-host, feeling cornered, lashed out during another episode of The View. This time her frustration boiled over. I'm tired of being vilified for something that was never meant to hurt anyone, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I made a joke. Maybe it landed wrong. But why does everyone have to turn this into a witch hunt? Her vulnerability caught viewers off guard. Some sympathized, seeing her as a victim of cancel culture. Others remained unmoved, believing an apology should have come sooner. Karoline watched the episode from home, her expression unreadable. On one hand, she understood the weight of public scrutiny. It was exhausting and relentless. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the inconsistency in the co-host's messaging. If the original comment had truly been harmless, why did its defense feel so defensive? Why hadn't there been a genuine effort to connect with those who felt hurt? These questions lingered in Karoline's mind, but she chose not to engage publicly. Instead, she focused on her work, letting her actions speak louder than any rebuttal ever could. Behind the scenes, cracks began to form in the co-host's career. Rumors swirled about strained relationships with producers and declining morale among the cast. Viewership numbers told a grim story, prompting executives to consider reshuffling the lineup. Though no official announcement came, insiders hinted that changes were inevitable. For the co-host, this realization was sobering. She had always prided herself on being quick-witted and unapologetically bold. Now those same traits threatened to overshadow everything she'd worked for. Yet, amid the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. During a private meeting with her agent, the co-host broke down in tears. For the first time, she admitted she might have gone too far. I never wanted to hurt anyone, she confessed. I don't know how to fix this. Her agent, sensing an opportunity for redemption, encouraged her to take responsibility. Not through another defensive statement, but through action. Together, they brainstormed ways to rebuild trust and demonstrate growth. For Karoline, the unfolding drama served as a reminder of the ripple effects of our choices. Every word we say, every decision we make carries consequences, not just for ourselves but for those around us. As she prepared for her next town hall, she reflected on the lessons she'd learned. Standing firm in your beliefs doesn't mean shutting others out. Leading with grace doesn't mean sacrificing strength. And sometimes the hardest battles are fought not against others, but within ourselves. As the chapter closed on this phase of her journey, Karoline knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Change rarely is. But she also knew that moments of conflict, if handled with care, can become catalysts for connection. And in a world desperate for unity, that was a lesson worth sharing and living every single day. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for both Karoline and the co-host. though their experiences couldn't have been more different. Karoline's town halls gained traction, drawing larger crowds each time. People traveled from neighboring towns just to attend, eager to hear her speak and share their own stories. The events became less about her and more about the community, ordinary people coming together to find common ground. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Some attendees clashed over deeply held beliefs, and emotions occasionally ran high. But Karoline had a knack for diffusing tension. She'd step in with a gentle reminder, "We're here to listen, not to win arguments." Her approach earned her even more admiration. Critics who once dismissed her as overly idealistic began to see her in a new light. Reporters covering the town halls noted how she handled disagreements, not by shutting them down but by encouraging open dialogue. One journalist wrote, "Karoline doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, she creates space for others to find their own." That authenticity resonated far beyond the communities she visited. Clips of the town halls went viral, sparking conversations across the country. For many, it was refreshing to see someone prioritize understanding over division. Meanwhile, the co-host's situation grew increasingly precarious. Despite her emotional plea on The View, public sentiment remained mixed. While some viewers appreciated her honesty, others saw it as too little, too late. Advertisers continued to distance themselves and ratings struggled to recover. Behind the scenes, network executives debated whether keeping her on the show was worth the risk. Rumors swirled that her contract might not be renewed when it expired at the end of the season. The uncertainty weighed heavily on her, making it hard to focus on anything else. In an attempt to salvage her reputation, the co-host took her agent's advice and decided to take action. She reached out to a local nonprofit organization that focused on interfaith dialogue, offering to volunteer her time. At first, the nonprofit was hesitant. They worried her involvement might attract negative attention or come across as insincere. But after several heartfelt conversations, they agreed to give her a chance. Her first day volunteering was nerve-wracking. She walked into the community center unsure of how she'd be received. Would people recognize her? Would they judge her before she even opened her mouth? To her surprise, most of the participants didn't seem to care who she was. They were there for the same reason she was, to learn and grow. Over time, she found herself drawn to the work. Listening to people share their stories reminded her of something she'd forgotten. Everyone carries burdens we can't see. A young woman spoke about losing her faith after a tragedy. An older man talked about rediscovering his spirituality later in life. Each story challenged her assumptions and forced her to confront her own biases. Slowly, but surely, she began to understand why her comment on The View had caused so much pain. Back in the spotlight, Karoline continued to shine. Her efforts to foster unity caught the attention of national leaders who invited her to speak at conferences and policy summits. She used these platforms to advocate for empathy and inclusivity, urging decision-makers to consider the human impact of their choices. "Policies don't affect numbers, they affect lives," she often said. Her message struck a chord, earning her invitations to collaborate on initiatives aimed at bridging divides in education, healthcare, and beyond. But Karoline wasn't immune to challenges. As her profile grew, so did the scrutiny. Critics accused her of being too soft, arguing that leadership required tough decisions, not endless hand-holding. Others claimed she was using her platform for personal gain, pointing to the surge in media appearances and speaking engagements. These accusations stung, especially because she worked tirelessly to ensure her actions aligned with her values. Still, she refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she leaned on the lessons she'd learned along the way. Stay true to yourself, and trust that your intentions will speak for themselves. As the months passed, the contrast between Karoline and the co-host became impossible to ignore. Where one had chosen grace and accountability, the other had stumbled through defensiveness and denial. The co-host's attempts at redemption were admirable, but they couldn't undo the damage already done. Eventually, the network made its decision. In a brief announcement, executives confirmed that her contract would not be renewed. Though framed as a mutual agreement, insiders knew better. The writing had been on the wall for months. For the co-host, the news was devastating. Losing her spot on The View felt like the end of the road, a career-defining opportunity slipping through her fingers. But in the midst of despair, she found clarity. Volunteering with the nonprofit had changed her perspective. She realized success wasn't measured by fame or accolades. It was about the impact you left on the world. Determined to rebuild, she decided to pivot her career. Using her platform for good, she launched a podcast focused on storytelling and self-reflection. It wasn't an overnight success, but it gave her purpose, a second chance to connect with people in a meaningful way. Karoline, meanwhile, faced a crossroads of her own. Her growing influence opened doors she hadn't anticipated, including potential runs for higher office. Supporters urged her to seize the moment, convinced she could make history. But Karoline hesitated. Politics was fraught with compromise, and she worried about losing sight of what mattered most, serving others without ego or agenda. After much soul-searching, she made a decision. She would continue advocating for unity and understanding, but on her terms. Whether that led to elected office or another path remained to be seen. By now, the controversy that had started it all felt like a distant memory. Yet its lessons lingered, shaping the trajectories of both women in profound ways. For Karoline, it reinforced the importance of staying grounded in her values, no matter how loud the noise around her became. For the co-host, it served as a humbling reminder that words carry weight and that redemption requires more than apologies. Both emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the power they held to influence the world around them. As the chapter closed on this pivotal moment in their lives, one truth stood out. Growth rarely comes without struggle. But for those willing to embrace discomfort, it offers the chance to become better versions of themselves, not just for their own sake, but for the sake of others. And in a world hungry for connection, that was a legacy worth striving for. The months rolled on, and life moved forward for both Karoline and the co-host. Yet the lessons they had learned continued to shape their paths in unexpected ways. For Karoline, the journey was less about personal glory and more about creating lasting change. Her town halls evolved into something bigger, a nationwide movement focused on empathy, respect, and unity. What started as small gatherings in community centers grew into large-scale events held in auditoriums and convention halls. People from all walks of life came together, eager to be part of something that felt increasingly rare in today's world: genuine connection. Karoline didn't just talk, she listened. At every event, she made it a point to hear directly from attendees, whether it was a teenager struggling with bullying or a senior citizen feeling invisible in a fast-paced society. Each story mattered to her. She often shared these stories during interviews, not to highlight her role but to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. This approach earned her trust and loyalty, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. People saw themselves, in her flaws and all. Her growing influence brought opportunities she hadn't imagined. Universities invited her to deliver commencement speeches. Corporations asked her to consult on diversity and inclusion initiatives. Even political figures sought her advice on how to bridge divides within communities. But with every new opportunity came challenges. Critics accused her of being too idealistic, claiming her methods wouldn't work in the real world. Others dismissed her efforts as performative, suggesting she cared more about headlines than actual impact. These accusations hurt, especially since she poured so much of herself into her work. Still, she refused to let negativity define her. Instead, she leaned on the support of those who believed in her mission. For the co-host, rebuilding her life proved to be a slow and humbling process. Losing her spot on The View had been a blow, but it also forced her to reevaluate what truly mattered. Her podcast, though still finding its footing, became a lifeline. Each episode featured candid conversations with people from diverse backgrounds: artists, activists, teachers, and everyday individuals sharing their struggles and triumphs. The co-host approached these discussions with a newfound openness, asking questions she might have once avoided. Over time, listeners began to notice a shift. Gone was the sharp-edged humor that had defined her earlier career. In its place was vulnerability, curiosity, and a willingness to grow. One episode stood out in particular. A guest shared their experience of losing faith after a devastating loss. As they spoke, the co-host listened intently, nodding along. When it was her turn to respond, she admitted, "I used to think faith was outdated. I didn't understand why anyone would cling to something so intangible. But hearing your story makes me realize how much I missed. Faith isn't just about belief. It's about hope, resilience, and finding meaning even when life feels unbearable." Her words struck a chord with listeners, many of whom reached out to thank her for acknowledging perspectives she once dismissed. Despite these strides, the co-host faced moments of doubt. Some days she wondered if she'd ever regain the level of success she'd once enjoyed. Other times, guilt over her past actions weighed heavily on her. During one particularly tough week, she confided in a close friend, admitting, "I feel like I'm constantly trying to prove I've changed, but no matter what I do, some people will never forgive me." Her friend reminded her that forgiveness wasn't something she could demand. It had to be earned, and that took time. "Focus on becoming the person you want to be," they said. "The rest will follow." As the two women navigated their separate journeys, their paths briefly crossed again, at least indirectly. Karoline was invited to speak at a leadership conference where she delivered a keynote address on accountability and growth. Speaking without notes, she reflected on the incident that had sparked so much debate. "We all make mistakes," she said. "What sets us apart isn't whether we stumble, but how we rise after we fall. Growth requires humility, courage, and a willingness to listen, even when it's uncomfortable." In the audience, the co-host sat quietly, watching and listening. Though Karoline never mentioned her by name, the message felt deeply personal. After the speech, the co-host approached her backstage. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Finally, the co-host broke the silence. "I want to thank you," she said softly. "Your response to everything, it taught me a lot. I know I messed up, and I'm working on doing better. So, thank you for handling it the way you did." Karoline smiled warmly, extending her hand. "We're all learning," she replied. "And I think you're doing great." That brief encounter marked a turning point, not just for them, but for everyone paying attention. It served as a reminder that redemption isn't a solo journey. It's shaped by the grace of others and the choices we make moving forward. Both women left the conference with renewed determination. For Karoline, it reinforced her belief in leading with compassion. For the co-host, it solidified her commitment to growth, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. Back in their respective worlds, the ripple effects of their experiences continued to unfold. Karoline expanded her initiatives, partnering with organizations to promote kindness and understanding in schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Her message resonated globally, inspiring similar movements in other countries. Meanwhile, the co-host's podcast gained traction, earning praise for its authenticity and depth. Listeners appreciated her willingness to tackle tough topics head-on, offering a platform for underrepresented voices. Though their lives remained different in many ways, both women carried the same lesson. Our actions, good or bad, leave lasting impressions. For Karoline, this meant staying true to her values even when it was hard. For the co-host, it meant owning her mistakes and striving to be better. Neither journey was easy, but both were worth it. They had faced adversity, confronted their flaws, and emerged stronger, not despite their struggles, but because of them. As the year drew to a close, both women reflected on how far they'd come. Karoline looked back on a calendar filled with meaningful connections, heartfelt conversations, and tangible progress. The co-host celebrated milestones she once thought impossible: loyal listeners, impactful episodes, and a renewed sense of purpose. Though their stories were unique, they shared a common thread: the belief that change starts with us. And in a world desperate for healing, that belief made all the difference. Years had passed since the incident on The View, but its echoes still lingered, not as a source of pain or division, but as a reminder of growth and resilience. Karoline stood on stage at a leadership conference, addressing an audience of thousands. She was no longer just a politician or advocate. She was a symbol of hope for many who believed in the power of unity and understanding. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught her lessons that would stay with her forever. As she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experience. "Life is full of moments that test us," she began, her tone warm and conversational. "Moments where we're forced to choose between reacting out of anger or responding with grace. I've faced my share of those moments, and I won't pretend I always got it right. But what I've learned is this: every challenge is an opportunity, a chance to grow, to connect, and to become better versions of ourselves." She paused, letting her words sink in. The crowd sat quietly, hanging on every syllable. Then she shared a story, one she rarely told. It was about the night after the infamous episode when she sat alone in her hotel room scrolling through social media. "I saw so much hurt," she said. "So many people sharing how they felt dismissed, disrespected, even devalued. And I realized something important. This wasn't about me anymore, it was about them, the millions of people who deserve to be heard." That realization, she explained, became the driving force behind everything she did next. Her speech wasn't just a reflection on her own journey. It was a call to action. She urged the audience to embrace discomfort, to lean into difficult conversations, instead of avoiding them. "Change doesn't happen when we stay comfortable," she said. "It happens when we step outside our bubble and listen to those who think differently, look differently, live differently. Because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all want respect, dignity, and a sense of belonging." The applause that followed was thunderous, filling the room with energy. But for Karoline, the real reward wasn't the standing ovation. It was knowing she'd planted seeds of inspiration in hearts and minds. As she stepped off the stage, someone approached her. A familiar face from years ago. It was the co-host, now transformed in more ways than one. Gone was the bravado and sharp wit that once defined her. In its place was humility, warmth, and a quiet strength. They exchanged smiles before the co-host spoke. "I never thought I'd say this," she admitted, "but I owe you a lot. You could have torn me apart back then, but you didn't. Instead, you showed me what true leadership looks like, leading not with judgment but with compassion." Karoline nodded, brushing away tears. "We both grew from that moment," she replied softly. "And honestly, watching you rebuild your life has been inspiring. You've proven that second chances are possible if you're willing to work for them." Their reunion was brief, but meaningful. Though their paths had diverged, they remained connected by the lessons they'd learned. For the co-host, the past few years had been transformative. Her podcast had evolved into a platform for healing and connection, earning accolades for its authenticity and impact. She often credited Karoline's response during the controversy as the catalyst for her change. "If she hadn't handled things the way she did," she once told a listener, "I might still be stuck in my old patterns, blind to the harm I was causing." But her journey wasn't without challenges. There were days when criticism resurfaced, reminding her of mistakes she wished she could erase. Yet she refused to let those voices define her. Instead, she focused on the positive changes she'd made, both personally and professionally, hosting events, mentoring young creators, and collaborating with organizations promoting empathy. She found joy in giving back. Each small victory reinforced her belief that redemption isn't a destination, it's a continuous process. For Karoline, the years brought new opportunities and new tests. Her advocacy work expanded globally, reaching communities grappling with division and mistrust. She traveled extensively, meeting people whose stories mirrored her own struggles. A farmer in rural India taught her the importance of patience in resolving conflicts. A teacher in South Africa reminded her of the resilience required to bridge cultural gaps. These encounters deepened her perspective, shaping her approach to leadership and service. Yet, amidst the accolades and achievements, Karoline remained grounded. She often returned to the town halls that started it all, sitting among participants and listening intently. To her, these gatherings weren't just events. They were reminders of why she did what she did. "It's easy to get caught up in titles and recognition," she once confessed to a colleague. "But at the end of the day, what matters most is making a difference in people's lives." As both women reflected on their journeys, they recognized a universal truth. Adversity shapes us in ways comfort never could. For Karoline, the controversy had sharpened her resolve to lead with integrity. For the co-host, it had sparked a journey of self-discovery and accountability. Together, their stories illustrated the power of choice, the decision to rise above bitterness, to learn from failure, and to use our experiences to uplift others. Today, their legacies are intertwined, though they walk separate paths. Karoline continues to champion unity, using her platform to inspire generations to come. The co-host dedicates herself to amplifying underrepresented voices, proving that transformation is possible even after missteps. Both serve as living proof that while we can't control every situation, we can control how we respond. And that choice defines us far more than any mistake ever could. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, their stories remind us of something essential. Humanity thrives when we choose kindness over cruelty, connection over conflict, and growth over stagnation. And sometimes, the hardest battles yield the greatest victories, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. The years rolled on, and the ripple effects of Karoline's and the co-hosts' journeys continued to spread far beyond their personal lives. Their stories weren't just individual tales of growth. They became part of a larger narrative about resilience, accountability, and the power of second chances. Both women had faced moments that could have derailed them entirely, but instead, they chose paths that inspired countless others to reflect on their own lives. Karoline's influence reached corners of the world she never imagined. Her town halls, once small gatherings in community centers, evolved into international forums where people from different cultures, religions, and backgrounds came together to share their stories. These events weren't about finding quick solutions or debating ideologies. They were about creating spaces for genuine connection. At one such forum in Europe, a young refugee shared his experience of fleeing war only to face prejudice in his new home. "People see me as a problem," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "But I'm not a problem, I'm a person." Karoline listened intently, her eyes glistening with tears. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't offer platitudes or empty promises. Instead, she turned to the audience and asked, "How can we do better? How can we make sure everyone feels seen, heard, and valued?" The question sparked hours of discussion, leading to actionable ideas that participants took back to their communities. For Karoline, these moments reaffirmed her belief in the power of collective effort. Change wasn't something one person could achieve alone. It required collaboration, empathy, and a willingness to listen. Meanwhile, the co-host's podcast gained a loyal following, becoming a beacon of hope for those navigating their own struggles with regret and redemption. Each episode delved into raw, unfiltered conversations with guests who had faced adversity head-on. One particularly moving episode featured a former inmate who had turned his life around after serving time for a serious crime. "I spent years hating myself," he confessed. "But then I realized hatred wasn't going to fix anything. So I started focusing on what I could control, how I treated others, how I contributed to my community." The co-host leaned forward, visibly moved. "That takes incredible courage," she said. "To look at your past and say, I'm not defined by this." After the episode aired, listeners flooded social media with messages of gratitude. Many shared their own stories of overcoming guilt and shame, saying the interview reminded them that no one is beyond redemption. For the co-host, these responses were a testament to the impact of vulnerability, not just hers, but also the courage of her guests to open up. Despite their successes, neither woman forgot the challenges. they'd faced along the way. Karoline often spoke about the nights she doubted herself, wondering if she was making any real difference. "There were times when I felt like giving up," she admitted during an interview. "The criticism, the pressure, it all felt overwhelming. But then I'd remember why I started this journey in the first place. It wasn't for fame or recognition. It was because I believed in the possibility of change, for myself and for others." Similarly, the co-host acknowledged that her transformation hadn't been easy. She still encountered skeptics who questioned whether her efforts were sincere. Some accused her of using her past mistakes as a marketing gimmick, while others dismissed her work as insufficient. Rather than letting these comments derail her, she used them as motivation to keep pushing forward. "If someone doesn't believe in me, that's okay," she said during a live Q&A session. "Because I know I'm doing this for the right reasons. And if even one person finds hope in my story, then it's worth it." Their journeys intersected again unexpectedly when a major network approached both women to collaborate on a special documentary series. The project aimed to explore themes of forgiveness, redemption, and unity through real-life stories. Initially hesitant, they agreed to participate, recognizing the potential to amplify important conversations. Over several months, they traveled together to meet individuals whose lives embodied these themes. A recovering addict rebuilding trust with his family, a former rival turned ally advocating for peace, and a grieving mother forgiving the person responsible for her child's death. Working side by side allowed them to reconnect on a deeper level. They laughed over shared meals, debated passionately about societal issues, and supported each other during emotional interviews. Though their personalities remained distinct, they discovered a mutual respect that transcended their differences. "We're not so different, you know," the co-host remarked one evening as they wrapped up filming. "We've both been given opportunities to grow, and we've both chosen to take them." The documentary premiered to widespread acclaim, praised for its honesty and heart. Viewers marveled at how two women who once stood on opposite sides of controversy had come together to create something meaningful. Critics hailed it as a powerful reminder of humanity's capacity for healing and connection. For Karoline and the co-host, the experience solidified their belief in the importance of storytelling, not just as a tool for entertainment, but as a catalyst for change. As the years went by, their legacies intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. Karoline's initiatives inspired schools and workplaces to adopt programs promoting empathy and inclusivity. The co-host's podcast became a staple in classrooms, used by teachers to spark discussions about resilience and personal growth. Together, they proved that even the most contentious moments could lead to profound transformation, if approached with humility and determination. Looking back, both women reflected on the lessons they'd learned. For Karoline, it was the realization that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and empowering others to find solutions. For the co-host, it was understanding that mistakes don't define us. Our response to them does. Both emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to leaving the world better than they found it. In a final speech at a global summit, Karoline summed it up perfectly. "Life will always throw challenges our way. Some will feel insurmountable, unfair, even unbearable. But within every challenge lies an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to connect. Let's choose to see those opportunities, not as burdens, but as gifts. Because when we rise above adversity, we inspire others to do the same." And so, their stories served as a testament to the enduring power of grace, courage, and the unwavering belief that no matter where we start, we have the ability to shape our destinies, and perhaps, in doing so, touch the lives of others along the way. The final chapter of this journey wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was defined by the quiet, steady impact both women continued to have on the world around them. Years had passed since their initial clash and subsequent growth, but their stories remained alive in the hearts of those they touched. It wasn't just about what they had achieved. It was about how they inspired others to take steps toward healing, understanding, and unity. Karoline's work evolved into something far greater than she ever imagined. Her town halls and forums turned into a global movement called Bridges, a name chosen to symbolize connection across divides. The initiative partnered with schools, businesses, and community organizations to create programs that fostered empathy and collaboration. Teachers incorporated Bridges' curriculum into classrooms, teaching students the value of listening without judgment. Companies adopted its principles, encouraging employees to embrace diversity and resolve conflicts through dialogue rather than division. One standout moment came when a struggling neighborhood in a major city decided to implement Bridges' model. Crime rates were high, tensions between residents and law enforcement were palpable, and trust seemed like an impossible goal. But over time, workshops and open discussions began breaking down walls. A local police officer shared his fears about being misunderstood, while a resident spoke about feeling targeted simply for walking home at night. These conversations weren't easy. They were raw, emotional, and sometimes painful, but they planted seeds of change. Slowly, relationships improved, and the community became a shining example of what happens when people choose to engage instead of retreat. For Karoline, witnessing these transformations reinforced her belief in the power of small actions. She often reminded herself and others that big movements start with tiny steps. "It's not about fixing everything overnight," she said during a visit to the neighborhood. "It's about showing up consistently, listening deeply, and believing that progress is possible, even if it takes years." Her humility resonated with everyone who crossed her path, from seasoned leaders to young activists eager to make a difference. Meanwhile, the co-host's podcast reached new heights, becoming one of the most downloaded series globally. What started as a personal project born out of reflection had grown into a platform for underrepresented voices. Each episode tackled tough topics: mental health, systemic inequality, forgiveness, but always with a focus on hope and resilience. Listeners tuned in not just for the content, but for the authenticity that radiated through every word. One particularly impactful episode featured a woman who had survived domestic abuse. Her story was harrowing, yet she spoke with strength and purpose. "I used to think I was alone," she said, "but telling my truth has shown me there are so many people out there fighting similar battles. And knowing we're not alone makes all the difference." The co-host sat quietly, tears streaming down her face before responding. "Thank you for trusting us with your story," she said softly. "Your courage reminds me why this matters." That episode struck a chord worldwide. Calls poured into helplines, social media buzzed with support, and donations flooded organizations working to combat domestic violence. For the co-host, it was proof that storytelling could save lives. "When we share our pain, we give others permission to do the same," she wrote in a heartfelt post after the episode aired, "and that's where healing begins." Despite their successes, neither woman forgot the importance of staying grounded. Karoline still attended local events, sitting among participants and engaging in conversations like anyone else. She refused to let fame distance her from the very people she aimed to serve. "If I lose touch with the communities I'm trying to help, then I've failed," she told a friend once. Her genuine approach earned her trust and admiration, even from critics who once doubted her intentions. Similarly, the co-host remained committed to using her platform responsibly. She avoided flashy endorsements or lucrative deals that didn't align with her mission. Instead, she focused on amplifying causes close to her heart: education reform, mental health awareness, and restorative justice. At speaking engagements, she openly acknowledged her past mistakes, reminding audiences that no one is beyond redemption. "If I can stand here today and make a positive impact, then anyone can," she often said. Growth isn't about perfection, it's about effort. Their paths continued to cross occasionally, each meeting reinforcing the bond they'd formed over the years. During one such reunion, they found themselves laughing over coffee, reminiscing about how far they'd come. "Do you remember that awkward backstage moment at the conference?" the co-host teased. "I thought you were going to hate me forever." Karoline chuckled, shaking her head. "Honestly, I respected you more than you realize. You faced criticism head-on and worked hard to change. That takes guts." These moments of levity balanced the weight of their responsibilities. They knew their journeys hadn't been perfect. There were missteps, doubts, and days when the pressure felt unbearable. But they also knew that perseverance had paid off. Together, they proved that growth isn't linear. It's messy, unpredictable, and deeply human. As the years went on, their legacies intertwined in ways that transcended individual achievements. Books were written about their stories, documentaries explored their impact, and schools taught their lessons as case studies in leadership and resilience. Yet both women stayed humble, deflecting praise onto the communities they served. "This isn't about us," Karoline said during a panel discussion. "It's about the countless people doing the hard work every single day. We're just two pieces of a much bigger puzzle." In the end, their greatest accomplishment wasn't fame or accolades. It was the ripple effect of their choices. Countless individuals found courage to confront their own struggles because of their examples. Families reconciled after years of estrangement inspired by messages of forgiveness. Communities rebuilt fractured relationships guided by principles of empathy and respect. Their stories became living proof that even in a divided world, connection is possible and powerful. Years later, when asked what advice they would give to someone facing adversity, their answers mirrored each other. "Don't be afraid to stumble," Karoline said. "Every mistake is an opportunity to learn." The co-host echoed the sentiment. "Own your flaws, but don't let them define you. Keep moving forward one step at a time." And so, their journeys came full circle, not as tales of triumph over hardship, but as reminders of the beauty in imperfection. Through grace, accountability, and unwavering determination, they showed the world that growth is a lifelong process. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that will continue inspiring generations to come.